The classroom is filled with the soft scratching of pencils on paper, the kind of focused silence that often accompanies a test. Aaliyah sat near the back, her eyes darting across the paper in front of her, her pencil moving quickly as she worked through the questions. Despite her concentration, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her closely. Emily Sanders, the new teacher, prowled the aisles between desks, her heels clicking sharply against the floor with each step. She moved with purpose, keeping an air of authority that seemed to demand both respect and fear. She stopped briefly at Aaliyah's desk, her gaze lingering longer than necessary. Without saying a word, Emily reached down and lightly tapped Aaliyah's hand, correcting her posture. "Sit up straight, Aaliyah," she said, her voice laced with condescension. Aaliyah flinched at the sharpness in Emily's tone, but she quickly corrected her posture and tried to focus on the test. Emily continued her walk around the room, but her eyes returned to Aaliyah's desk every few moments, as though she were expecting the girl to slip up. Aaliyah felt her heart race. It wasn't the first time Emily had singled her out for the smallest of things. Moments later, Emily paused again beside Aaliyah. This time, she pointed out that Aaliyah wasn't holding her pencil in the proper way. Aaliyah, who'd been writing quickly to finish the test, tried to ignore the comment, but it stung. She knew Emily's criticism wasn't about the pencil, something else was going on. Aaliyah's classmates, many of whom had noticed Emily's fixation on her, exchanged uncomfortable glances but didn't speak up. It had become clear to everyone that the teacher's attention toward Aaliyah was harsher than it was toward any of the other students. Some were too scared to speak out, while others simply didn't want to get involved. But the tension in the air was palpable, and even the class, usually filled with the low murmur of pens against paper, had become thick with unspoken thoughts. Aaliyah's hand shook slightly as she raised it to ask Emily for clarification on a math problem she was struggling to solve. It had been a particularly tricky equation, and while she had made some progress, she couldn't seem to get the last part right. With her head slightly tilted, she asked, "Miss Sanders, could you explain step 3 again? I'm not sure I understand." Emily turned toward her, her eyes narrowing as she approached Aaliyah's desk. There was no warmth in her voice when she spoke, only thinly veiled irritation. "If you'd been paying attention like everyone else, you wouldn't need help," she said loudly, making sure the rest of the class heard. Aaliyah's face flushed with embarrassment, and she quickly lowered her hand, her eyes fixed on the paper in front of her. She wished the ground would swallow her whole. It wasn't the first time Emily had embarrassed her in front of the class, but the sting felt worse this time. She could feel her classmates' eyes on her, some shifting uncomfortably, others avoiding eye contact altogether. As Emily moved away, she muttered, "It's a wonder some of you even made it into this advanced class." The words hung in the air like a cloud of judgment, and Aaliyah's stomach twisted. She knew what Emily meant. She was talking about her. The insinuation was clear. Aaliyah didn't belong here. Over the next few days, Emily's remarks became increasingly biting. Whenever Aaliyah made a mistake, Emily was there, waiting to pounce. "Shocking," she'd mutter. "I thought you were smarter than that." Or when Aaliyah raised her hand to answer a question, Emily would roll her eyes and say, "Let's see if you can actually get this one right, shall we?" Despite these cruel comments, Aaliyah kept her head down. She was trying to do well, trying to prove she belonged. But it was getting harder and harder to ignore the way Emily treated her. Her classmates noticed too, though none of them said anything. It was easier to pretend nothing was wrong, easier to turn a blind eye than to stand up against their teacher. The breaking point came during a group presentation, a task Emily had assigned for the class. Aaliyah had worked hard on her section, carefully preparing what she planned to say to the class. As she began to speak, sharing her findings on the assigned topic, Emily interrupted her sharply, her voice cutting through Aaliyah's words. "Stop," Emily said. "Are you sure you didn't just copy this from the internet? It's too good to be your work." The entire class went silent. Aaliyah froze, her heart pounding in her chest. The words were like a slap in the face, humiliating in front of everyone. Her face turned bright red, and the tears she had been holding back for weeks began to fall. She tried to speak, to defend herself, but no words came out. She felt small, exposed, and utterly powerless. I didn't copy it," Aaliyah managed to choke out, but her voice trembled with emotion. Emily stood there, arms crossed, unyielding. "Well, maybe you should start thinking for yourself," she sneered, before turning away to address the rest of the class, as if Aaliyah's breakdown was nothing more than an inconvenience. Aaliyah couldn't hold it in anymore. Her shoulders shook as she sobbed quietly, unable to control the overwhelming feeling of shame. It felt like the entire class was staring at her, judging her, and she couldn't escape it. One by one, the students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one dared to speak up. The silence in the room seemed to mock her, making her feel even more isolated. As the tears continued to fall, Aaliyah realized she couldn't keep doing this. She couldn't keep taking the abuse, no matter how much she wanted to prove herself. She needed to speak up. She had to stand up for herself even if no one else would. The door to the classroom opened suddenly, and Mr. Charles Benson, the school's principal, walked in. He was a tall man, known for his calm and authoritative demeanor. The class instantly grew quiet at his arrival, and Emily, who had been pacing at the front of the room, immediately stiffened. She hadn't expected the principal to drop by in the middle of a lesson, especially not during a tense moment like this. Mr. Benson's sharp eyes immediately landed on Aaliyah, who was still sitting at her desk, her face red from crying. He approached her slowly, concern etched across his face. "Aaliyah, are you all right?" he asked gently, his voice soothing as he crouched beside her. Aaliyah didn't respond immediately. She felt embarrassed, humiliated, and afraid to speak. The weight of her emotions was too much to handle in front of the class and the principal. Seeing Aaliyah's distress, Mr. Benson stood up straight, his gaze now shifting to Emily, who had stopped speaking and was standing at the front, trying to maintain her composure. "Miss Sanders, what's going on here?" he asked, his tone now more authoritative, though still calm. Emily quickly straightened her posture, trying to regain control of the situation. She wasn't prepared for the principal's questioning, and it was clear she was flustered. "Well, Mr. Benson, I'm just trying to keep order in my classroom," Emily began, her voice defensive. "Aaliyah has been disruptive, and she's not following instructions like the other students. I had to remind her of her responsibilities. It's important to be fair to everyone." Mr. Benson raised an eyebrow. "Disruptive? I don't see how a student asking a question or presenting their work could be considered disruptive, especially when they've prepared for it. Are you saying she wasn't allowed to ask for clarification?" His voice was now tinged with a hint of disbelief, and Emily's attempts to justify herself were beginning to lose their credibility. "Look," Emily continued, trying to salvage her position, "I was just enforcing discipline. Aaliyah wasn't paying attention during the lesson, and I had to correct her. She kept asking for help when she should have been more focused, and frankly, She's been acting out." "I was just doing my job." Mr. Benson stood silently for a moment, taking in her words, then glanced back at Aaliyah. His face softened as he knelt down next to her desk, his voice gentle. "Aaliyah, I want you to know that you're safe here, and we're going to make sure this gets sorted out." Aaliyah wiped her tears with the sleeve of her shirt, still too overwhelmed to speak. She looked at her principal, the person who had always been kind and fair to her, and found some comfort in his presence. It was at that moment that the full weight of the situation began to dawn on Emily. She didn't realize that Aaliyah was Mr. Benson's daughter. As the principal straightened up and looked at her, his expression was no longer just one of concern, but one of quiet authority. "Miss Sanders, I need you to step outside with me for a moment," Mr. Benson said, his voice calm but firm. Emily's face turned pale. She had been so caught up in her attempt to control the classroom that she hadn't bothered to realize who Aaliyah really was. Now, it was clear that her actions had not only been inappropriate, but had the potential to bring serious consequences. The room fell silent as Mr. Benson took a deep breath, standing next to Aaliyah. The tension in the air was palpable. Emily, still standing at the front of the room, looked at the principal with confusion, her defenses crumbling. She had assumed that Aaliyah was just another student she could push around, but the truth was now painfully clear. "Aaliyah, why don't you come up here with me for a moment?" Mr. Benson said, his voice calm but full of authority. He guided Aaliyah gently to his side, wrapping an arm around her shoulder in a gesture of support. "Emily, meet my daughter, Aaliyah." For a long moment, Emily stood frozen, her mouth slightly agape as the realization hit her. She had just humiliated the principal's daughter in front of the entire class. The weight of her actions hung heavily in the air. Her skin went pale, and she could feel her heart race as she stammered an apology. I didn't know," Emily said weakly, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean—" She trailed off, unable to finish her sentence as the reality of the situation set in. Aaliyah, who had been holding back her tears, now stood tall, with her head slightly tilted. She had endured so much already from Emily's harsh remarks, and this final blow felt like an unnecessary weight she didn't deserve. She glanced at her father, who was looking down at her with quiet strength and understanding. "Emily," Mr. Benson began, his tone now stern but still composed, "what you did today is not only unprofessional, but completely unacceptable. No student should be treated with that kind of disrespect, especially not because of their appearance or background." Emily flinched under the weight of his words. She had tried to justify her actions earlier, but now it was clear that her prejudices had been exposed. As the conversation continued, the classroom's atmosphere shifted. The students, who had mostly remained silent during the tension, now began to murmur amongst themselves. Whispers spread like wildfire, and some of the students who had once been afraid to speak up started voicing their opinions. "I've seen her do this before," one student said, her voice rising with confidence. "She always picks on Aaliyah. She says stuff like, 'You should know better,' and 'People like you don't belong here.'" "Yeah," another student added, "she's always treated Aaliyah like she's less than us. We've all noticed it." Emily's eyes widened in shock as the students continued to share their experiences. The truth of her prejudices had been laid bare, and the whispers only grew louder. The students, emboldened by the presence of Mr. Benson and the spotlight on Emily's actions, now felt empowered to speak up. "Aaliyah is one of the smartest in this class," a boy piped up. "She doesn't deserve to be treated like this, and neither does anyone else." Mr. Benson's gaze didn't waver as he looked at Emily, his voice now calm but resolute. "Your behavior goes against everything we stand for in this school. We believe in fairness, respect, and giving every student a chance to thrive. I'm afraid your actions will have consequences." Emily's hands trembled at her sides as the weight of the moment crushed her defenses. She had never thought this would escalate this way, never imagined that the person she was demeaning could hold such power. But she had underestimated Aaliyah and her father, and now it was too late for her to backpedal. "Your prejudice and actions will not go unnoticed," Mr. Benson continued. "I'll be initiating a full investigation into your behavior and whether you are fit to continue teaching here. We will not tolerate this kind of treatment of any student under any circumstances." The room was quiet for a moment as Emily stood, pale and shaking, unable to find the words to respond. She had been caught in her lies, and now her own actions, fueled by unchecked bias, would result in consequences that would affect her career. Aaliyah stood tall beside her father. The humiliation she had experienced now acknowledged in the most public way. As Mr. Benson turned his attention to the class, the tension slowly began to fade. The students were beginning to realize that their voices mattered, that their courage to speak up had made a difference in holding Emily accountable. In a small, quiet office at the back of the school, Mr. Benson sat across from Emily, who was now visibly shaken. The weight of the situation was finally settling in, and the air between them was tense. Mr. Benson folded his hands on the desk, his face calm but stern. "Emily," he began, his voice steady but firm, "what happened today was unacceptable. This school has a zero-tolerance policy when it comes to discrimination, and your behavior goes against everything we stand for. Every child in this school, regardless of their background, deserves respect. Your actions today were a direct violation of that principle." Emily's hands trembled as she sat in the chair, struggling to hold back her emotions. She opened her mouth several times, but the right words seemed to escape her. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to. I didn't think—" "Don't," Mr. Benson interrupted gently. "You can't just explain this away. I understand that you may not have intended to cause harm, but the impact of your words and actions is undeniable. Aaliyah is a student here, and she's been subjected to unnecessary discrimination because of your behavior. That's something I can't overlook, no matter the circumstances." Emily lowered her head, her face flushed with shame. She could feel the weight of his words sinking in, and a sense of regret flooded her. I didn't realize how much I let my own biases influence my actions," she admitted, her voice cracking. "I'm sorry for how I treated Aaliyah. I was wrong." Mr. Benson nodded, not offering her any immediate comfort. "Apologies are a start, Emily, but this is about more than just saying you're sorry. Your actions have consequences. As part of the disciplinary process, I'm assigning you mandatory sensitivity training. You'll be working closely with professionals to help you understand the impact of your prejudice and learn how to be more inclusive in your teaching." Emily swallowed hard, feeling the sting of the reality that she would now have to face the consequences of her own actions. "I understand," she replied softly, her voice full of regret. "I'll do whatever it takes to make things right." Mr. Benson stood, signaling that the conversation was coming to an end. "I hope you do, Emily. This is an opportunity for you to reflect and grow. You have to learn how to recognize your own biases and actively work to change them. Our students depend on us to create a safe and fair environment." As Emily left the room, she felt the full weight of the responsibility that lay ahead of her. It would take time, but perhaps, just perhaps, This could be the turning point in her journey toward becoming a better teacher, not just in knowledge, but in empathy. Despite the painful and public nature of the incident, Aaliyah emerged stronger than ever. Her resilience, tempered by the unfairness she had faced, became a source of admiration not just among her classmates, but within the entire school community. Aaliyah, never one to let adversity define her, kept her head held high and continued excelling in her studies. Her determination to rise above the hurt and humiliation served as an inspiration to others, especially those who had witnessed the painful treatment she had endured. Her classmates, initially silent and passive in the face of Emily's actions, began to rally behind her. They offered support, whether through kind words or simply standing by her in the classroom. Aaliyah's strength gave them the courage to speak out against injustice, and she became a symbol of dignity and perseverance. When students in the class were asked about Aaliyah's behavior, they praised her for being calm, focused, and relentless in the pursuit of her goals despite the challenges. Meanwhile, Emily had her own journey of growth to navigate. The sensitivity training had been uncomfortable, but it had forced her to confront her own biases and prejudices head-on. After a few weeks of reflection and learning, Emily realized just how deeply her own assumptions had influenced her behavior. She began to understand the real harm caused by discrimination, not just in the classroom, but in the world beyond it. It was a hard pill to swallow, but Emily was committed to change. She knew that it wasn't enough to simply apologize and continue teaching without working to become better. Determined to make things right, Emily approached Aaliyah one day after class. She knelt down so that she was eye level with her, a gesture of respect that she hadn't fully given before. "Aaliyah, I want to sincerely apologize for my behavior. I wronged you, and I know I have a lot of work to do to earn your trust and respect. I promise I will do better." Aaliyah, who had been cautious but open to the idea of healing, looked at Emily thoughtfully before responding. "I appreciate you saying that, Mrs. Sanders. It's not just about the apology, though. It's about showing it through your actions. I believe that people can change, but it takes time." Emily nodded in agreement, her eyes sincere. "You're right, Aaliyah. I have a lot to learn. I hope I can show you and everyone that I can be the teacher you all deserve." In the following weeks, Emily made consistent efforts to change her approach in the classroom. She was more inclusive, listened to her students more attentively, and worked to treat everyone fairly. She no longer assumed that Aaliyah or any student's abilities were defined by their background. Emily consciously worked to create a more supportive environment where her students could thrive without fear of being judged. It wasn't easy, but Emily slowly rebuilt the trust she had broken. Her public apology to the class, where she acknowledged her mistakes and promised to do better, was an important step in making amends. Emily took the initiative to provide extra help to Aaliyah and other students, ensuring they had the tools to succeed. Slowly but surely, the classroom environment began to change. The tension that once hung in the air lifted, replaced by a sense of mutual respect. Aaliyah, for her part, continued to grow in her academic and personal journey. She became an advocate for fairness, using her experience to push for change within the school community. The once painful incident had transformed her into a leader who, despite her young age, had the strength to inspire others. The story culminates in a moment of triumph for Aaliyah. During the school's end-of-year assembly, Aaliyah is called to the front to receive an award for her outstanding academic performance. The applause is deafening, and the pride in the room is palpable. Aaliyah, with her head held high, walks to the stage to accept the award, her eyes gleaming with gratitude. As she takes the microphone, Aaliyah pauses for a moment, looking at the crowd. The teacher, who had once made her feel small, and the classmates who had silently observed her struggles, were now all looking at her with admiration. With a steady voice, Aaliyah begins her speech. I want to thank everyone for this honor. But more than that, I want to remind us all of something really important: kindness and equality. We all deserve to be treated with respect, no matter who we are or where we come from. I've learned that the way we treat each other shapes the world we live in. I didn't earn this award because I'm special. I earned it because I believe in doing my best and showing up for those who need me. And if I can inspire anyone to do the same, then that's the best gift I could ever receive. Her words resonate deeply with everyone in the room, including Emily, who stands at the back, visibly moved. Emily's eyes glisten as she watches Aaliyah. The growth of her student, from a young girl humiliated in front of the class to a poised young leader inspiring others, brings tears to Emily's eyes. It was a reminder of just how powerful resilience and grace can be in the face of adversity. The transformation in the classroom is evident. Emily works harder than ever to ensure a more inclusive environment, listening to her students, addressing their concerns, and ensuring that everyone feels valued. The atmosphere in the classroom shifts. Where once there had been tension, now there is respect. Students begin to speak up for one another, offering help and encouragement in a way that reflects the values Aaliyah had inspired. Aaliyah's growth into a leader is not just about her academic success. It's about her ability to change the culture around her. Her quiet strength and determination to rise above injustice have made her a role model, not only for her classmates, but for her teacher as well. The future, though uncertain, now seems full of hope. For Aaliyah, for Emily, and for everyone who believes that kindness, respect, and equality can truly make the world a better place.